One of my favorite scholars, Walter Brueggemann, has developed a very helpful way to categorize the Psalms. We've been looking at the Psalms this is our fourth week now, our fourth and final week, looking for solace, looking for peace amidst our fears and our anxieties. And if you look at Psalms, sometimes you open up to a Psalm and you don't identify with the feeling or the theme. Well, Brueggemann is able to help us with that. He says some Psalms help us find kind of our orientation. They help us make sense of things. They orient us. Some Psalms, on the other hand, can be disorientating. They can make us feel like, wow, somebody is sunk in a pit. It's not me, but somebody is. Whoever wrote this was having a hard time. Now, other times, if you're in that pit, you can find solace in that other person who wrote the psalm in that place of disorientation, asking, where are you, God? We talked about this a couple weeks ago, lamenting the things of life, the struggles. And then finally, today, we come to the psalms that reorientate us, the ones that help us come back, kind of recenter ourselves, find that new place of gratitude and awareness. And today we're looking at a well-known psalm, Psalm 46. Now, years of Christian art, including Kincaid, who's not really that old in terms of artwork, has led us astray. Because oftentimes you'll see the scripture, be still and know that I'm God. And it's under like a beautiful, quaint house somewhere in Vermont in the snow. And like in that place, of course, I can be still and know that there is God. It's a very nice place. But really, these words are spoken in a bus full of kids who are fighting over seats as they're driving 45 miles an hour down the road. And the bus driver finally comes to the stoplight and says, "Sit down and be quiet." Now, the kids have lost their way. They're not getting along. They're not loving their neighbor as they love themselves. They're fighting, and they're struggling to follow the way life should go. And sometimes the bus driver overreacts, right, and kind of has to... can you imagine being a bus driver alone, just for a moment, pause for a second, alone with the 20 or 30 kids going crazy? I know a pastor who did that some years ago. God bless him. But... that's not what's happening here. God's not yelling at us, but the psalm comes in the midst of this crazy time. The psalm comes on that crazy bus. The psalm comes to us in the midst of war, tragedy, calamity, fighting, struggles, medical problems, financial collapse, markets, the shadow of COVID-19 continuing around us. And how do we find that inner stillness in the midst of it all? And most of us feel like it's too busy to stop. It's too busy to find that stillness that we're looking for. It's been said perhaps the best metaphor for our daily lives is like going through a car wash. You know that drill. You pull up to the car wash, you pay, you're instructed to leave your engine running, you put the car into neutral, and it just carries you forward, and craziness happens, right? All kinds of things are happening to your car, and you're just kind of like going through it without any control. You feel almost powerless, and outside of you is, just madness. That's how our daily life can feel sometimes, without that stillness from God with us. Now, some of you might go to the car wash to hide. It only lasts for a minute, but anyway. Psalm 46 is that both and. It's that place of like, yes, you're in the desert, but you're also in the promised land. It's kind of that both and of life is difficult, but God is with you. The opening statement, it's a famous one. Lots of music has been written. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. In trouble. It's that kind of an opening like, do you trust? Do you know that God is there? Then later on, it talks about in verses 7 and 11, the Lord of hosts is with us. In 11, it says it again, the Lord of hosts is with us. It seems to be an emphasis on that God is with you in spite of how you feel, what you think, what you see, what you're hearing. It's a reminder that God is there with you. In the midst of political calamity, the voice of God is there. In the midst of problems at work, the voice of God is there. So today what we're going to talk about is how do we live out these words? We hear this, we sing this, God is our refuge and our strength. How do we find that place where that becomes real in our heart and soul? Well, step one really starts in the recovery movement where we admit that we have a problem, that we need help, really, that we are not our own source of strength and refuge, that we do have needs above and beyond our control, that we can't fix everything around us. We can't fix our government, our economy, the problems in our house, the problems in the workplace, things that we can't control, and they're driving us crazy. Another great Protestant reformer, John Calvin, said that what the psalmist meant to say was, he's not saying you should never fear, because God has given us this emotion to help us. In fact, to sometimes save us. It's good to fear, but not to be overwhelmed and overcome by fear. And so what he says is we will not fear. In the midst of our fear, we will not be oppressed by it. We will continue to move forward in spite of the fear. You probably have heard of the great Martin Luther. Protestant Reformation began with this person, 95 theses, disagreements he had, and he did translations of the Bible, and he wrote songs. And one of his great hymns is A Mighty Fortress, talking about our confidence is found in God and God alone. And really, in his German translation, he uses a word that means give it a try. Meaning, when it says be still, Martin Luther says, give it a try. Just try it. Try it out. See if it works. Speaking of German, there's a book that came out in 2021, The Remarkable Odyssey of Angela Merkel. I'm probably not saying that right, but she was the Chancellor of Germany. She led the German government from 2005 to 2021. And the book traces her rapid rise to power and her unblinking response to the nations around her. It stresses her deliberate pace of leadership, her refusal to engage in emotive rhetoric, her resistance to tribal defensiveness, and her courage in the policies that she developed. Most specifically, you might remember the crisis with refugees from Syria coming in, flooding in to Europe, and especially into Germany. She invited these people to come in. The folks in her country were wondering, what are you doing? Can we handle this? It seemed dangerous and daring to admit thousands of people into their country from Syria. But she nurtured this public policy of hospitality. She proceeded with prudence. She developed ways to handle these folks who needed help. She developed a phrase, basically, we can do this, in translation to English. We can do this. And they did it. This refugee crisis, it seems that she had that stillness in the midst of the noise and the people and the craziness around her, in the midst of how are we going to feed these people, how are we going to house these people questions. She pushed forward with sober judgment. It was said, nothing short of astonishing is that this country, formerly responsible for the Holocaust, was now regarded as a moral center. A place where people came in and found safety and peace and respite. So why is it hard for us everyday folks? Most of us won't be a chancellor. But how is it hard? Why is it so hard for us in our everyday fears and anxieties to move forward with the changes? I mean, I fear. Does that mean God is not my refuge? Not my strength? Here's the problem. We often are looking to kind of the shadows or things that are not quite God and God's strength. We're looking to systems and peoples and powers for our sense of safety and refuge. And those things eventually fall. Now, Luther is a funny person again. Luther, for all of the great things he did, was odd because when he wrote this song about the mighty fortress, he used a lot of military language. And I do have a picture here. Back in the day, when I say this, I mean like the 1970s probably, this book was out with a cover, Martin Luther, Hero of Faith. It's kind of a foggy, not clear picture because it's old. And that's not really an accurate portrayal of Martin Luther. He never fought in a war. He never rode a horse and carried a sword. But this is what we were taught, and some of these pictures might be laying around in some Sunday school somewhere or a nursery. But these images come because of Martin Luther's writing, okay? And he was not a person who was ever in the military. In fact, he was sick most of his life. He needed help. He also needed to hide when persecutors were coming for him. The next slide shows where he got to hide, and that's this wonderful castle called Wartburg. And it's no surprise that he wrote these hymns and these writings from that lovely place of safety where he could feel like God's protection. It's easy to write things when you're in that place, I think, isn't it? But the thing is, and we love these songs, and God has used these hymns, is some of that military language has come into the church, unfortunately, where we use phrases like, take your stand, take the biblical stance on this. We use kind of this language of, we're in a fight, and it's our way or the highway. And instead of looking inside, interior, for God as our refuge, we start looking at ways we can keep others out and ways that we can be right and everybody else is wrong. So there's been kind of a misinterpretation of Martin Luther's writings over the years and taken us to a different place. How do you feel that refuge? It's not about military might. It's not about your government or weapons. See, it says right in that psalm there, there's a river whose streams make glad the city of God. This is the holy habitation of the Most High. This river that's underneath the city. It's the foundation. The nations are in uproar. The kingdoms totter. God utters his voice, and the earth melts. But can you hear that voice? All right, so it says, to be still in this verse, I said earlier, doesn't mean you do nothing. It doesn't mean you give up. It doesn't mean you quit. It doesn't mean that you hide away in a beautiful cottage somewhere. It is a matter of surrendering, though, to God. So I'm going to give you a few points here. This psalm leads us directly to these points. Focus your hearts and minds on God. In other words, worship. Worship isn't just Sunday morning. Worship is what you're thinking about during the week, the things that you meditate on, the things that you listen to, the things that you read, the music. Worship ushers us into the presence of God. Now, while it's awesome if you have a neat place to do that somewhere in your house, or if you can go into the woods or by the water, but how can you do this on a daily basis? It takes practice. For many people, it begins in prayer. The story is told of a young adult who was excited to be sent on a mission trip overseas. When she arrived, she was assigned to the nursery, tending to the infants. This wasn't the edgy mission she was looking for, she said. But in those long hours of rocking babies and giving bottles and changing diapers, she grew a deeper prayer life. She said she was forever changed and grateful for the gift of time to pray deeply over these children, over these families, over this mission, over the church, over the world. Prayer life develops like that. The next thing we do in this psalm is we remember. Remember, God has been with us. I have to constantly do this. Sometimes I wake up and I feel like I've never done anything right. Life has been hard, and I've tripped and I've fallen, and here I am. And I forget all that God has done in my past up to this point. And so sometimes I wake up feeling alone, powerless, wondering, like, how can I pastor? What can I write about? What can I do? Who am I? And this little voice says, remember. Remember where I've taken you. I've always been with you, Adam. Sometimes obviously, sometimes not so obvious. So in the psalm, it says he makes wars to cease. And they have to remember, the Israelites at this time, what God had done for them. They're facing another enemy. What had God done for them in the past? Joshua, at the end of his life, reminded Israel of God's constant faithfulness. He said, God led you out of Egypt, through the Red Sea, in the wilderness, into the promised land. Now I'm about to go the way of all the earth. He was going to die. But he said, you know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God gave to you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one has failed. That doesn't mean they didn't have trouble. That doesn't mean that people didn't get sick. That doesn't mean that people didn't die on the way. But ultimately, long-range plan, God came through. And then finally, Sam talked about this last week, learning to give thanks. She called it, right, turning from panic to praise. And as you leave today, the sanctuary, we have a kiosk and paper and pens. And she was asking us to write down things we're thankful for and then tack those to that kiosk out there. So on your way out to shake my lovely hand, if you want to do that, that would be awesome. It could be as simple as, I'm thankful for the playground at school, or I'm thankful for my mom, or for food, or the Detroit Lions. Whatever you want to be thankful for. Think about, they've won games. Don't think about today. They have won in the past, and you're thankful for those moments. Stop and what? Count your blessings. There you go. I love this quote. There is an unaccountable solace that fierce landscapes offer to your soul. They heal as well as mirror the brokenness we find inside. Moving apprehensively outside into these sometimes foreign places, up to a mountain, through a wood, to a barren field, you discover a wild terrain which might be a metaphor of your deepest fears, but also a place you can find solace. So go into nature. That's a good place to remember, to stop, and to take a breath. Because the next day, you're back in it, right? The story is told of a woman who had to take her child to piano lessons. And the son, Gabriel, was taking piano lessons, and the parents wondering, why did I schedule these lessons at 9 a.m. in the morning? Grabbing the car keys from the cluttered desk in the kitchen, going out to the car, beeping the horn, waiting for the child to come out. Child walks out. It's January. Shoelaces dragging in the gray puddles because the shoes aren't tied. Gets into the van. They head over there. It's just a quiet ride over. They're both tired. And the parent, she says, sometimes when I go to these lessons, I get reinforced when I listen to him playing. This day that didn't work. I sat there worrying and stewing over my anxieties and my struggles, things that were coming that day. The lesson was over. We're driving back home, and suddenly I feel this nudge to stop by the river. They lived near the great Mississippi. And so she looked back and she said, Gabe, do you want to go to the river real quick with me? And Gabe's like, yeah, that sounds good. So they went and they sat at a bench in January by the river. Snow, ice. Just a few moments of stillness is what this parent needed. And as they sat there, the parent she said, I began to go through the reasons I was thankful. This open terrain, this cold, wintry day helped me to internalize, go inside for a moment and say, I am thankful for these things. God has been with us. Wow, what a wonderful opportunity we have for piano lessons. Today is wide open. It is what I will make of it. And so she found that stillness. She listened to that quiet voice and pulled over. And she said the rest of the day, although it was not perfect, she breathed easier. She was able to let go. She felt freer just from taking a moment and inviting her child into that moment. You know, this isn't the only time we hear these words, be still, is it? Jump forward to the Gospels. You might recall a story of Jesus and the disciples on a boat in the middle of a storm. And it's almost sarcastic because the gospel writer, and Jesus was sleeping. What a great time for a nap. He apparently didn't need Dramamine or Bonine like me. I can't even go fishing on a boat. But anyway, the disciples, Jesus, get up. There's a storm. We're about to lose it here. Jesus gets up and calmly says to the storm, peace, be still. And the storm slows down. And then Jesus turns to the disciples and says, have you still no faith? Again, he's not rebuking them. He's asking them, where are you at? Where are you at? Where is your mind at right now? He's speaking to a group that got to hear him personally, in person, right? Heard his teachings. They witnessed his miracles. They have felt the reassurance of God's presence on earth with them. They've heard Jesus teaching about the life to come. They were lucky enough to literally hang out with Jesus, and still they're on the boat, scared for their lives. And Jesus is right there with them. Now we get to carry on without Jesus in the flesh, amidst the same similar storms of life, whether they be earthly storms, physical storms, emotional storms, spiritual storms. Psalm 46 takes us into the eye of the storm and gives us these words, be still and know that I am God. There is a heavenly river. We get a vision of this in Revelation 21, right? The new heaven and the new earth is coming. But right now, it's our job to represent heaven on earth. We have the ability to turn weapons into plowshares by our words, by our actions. But only if we are still enough to hear and to see and to feel that still small voice. Amidst the noise that's all around us, it does take practice. So I encourage you this week to just read this psalm, Psalm 46. Read it, maybe find your favorite line and memorize it. Something you can go to in the midst of your struggles, in the midst of your week. We're ending this series. We're starting an amazing series next week. We are renaming the month. We have the power to do that here. We're calling October Kind-tober, because we're going to saturate this area with kindness. But the stuff that's happening out in the world is going to continue. And so I hope during this series you've taken maybe a piece with you to find that solace that God offers. Let's not take our eyes off the big picture. Let's be listening. And even as the storms whirl around us daily, we can choose to be still and know who is God. Amen.